Does the near-death experience research appear to be consistent with my understanding of Buddhist cosmology? Yes, very much so. This video is not exhaustive. In fact, it is just my response to one NDE video by a renowned researcher from the University of Virginia. I will go through a few points that I found to be very in line with my understanding of the Buddhist cosmology. And at the end of the video, I will also list out some other interesting NDE research points. First, I just want to mention that I'm just somewhat interested in Buddhism, so what I present here are from my limited background and knowledge. So a friend of mine forwarded me a link to a presentation by Dr. Bruce Greyson. He's a Carlson Professor Emeritus of Psychiatry and Neurobehavioral Sciences at the University of Virginia School of Medicine, and he is also the Director of Division of Perceptual Studies at UVA. And this talk is for his book launch about his research in NDE, and the book is called After. A doctor explores what near-death experiences reveal about life and beyond. And originally it just started with a small group, but now it's a bigger group, it's a standardized methodology of research, it is also worldwide, and what he presents are consistent regardless of cultural, religious backgrounds. So let's just get right to some points that I found fascinating. Mind does not equal brain. Now, have you heard of terminal lucidity? Somebody with no memory due to their brain being damaged, Alzheimer's or something else, for a long time suddenly becomes lucid before they die. And that moment could be just a few moments, hours, days, or even months. What he is saying here is that the brain seems to act like a filter of the worldly events, worldly experiences, while the mind actually comes through when the brain stops functioning. And so consciousness or the mind does not equal the brain. Now this digs deep into lots of topics in Buddhism, but I will not tackle them here. But this leads to the next point, and that is the consciousness continues beyond death. He gives an example where there was a young man named Jack who was hospitalized with severe pneumonia, and he had repeated respiratory arrest. One weekend, he had another respiratory arrest, and during that incident, he had an NDE. During that experience, he was in a beautiful pasture where he saw his regular nurse, Anita, who was out this weekend, and she walks toward him and says, "Go back to your body, it's not time yet, and can you tell my parents that I'm sorry for wrecking the red MGB?" And so when the young man was resuscitated, he told the first nurse he saw about his experience, and that Anita appeared in his NDE to want to pass the message along. That nurse took off from the room completely distraught. Apparently, Anita had taken that weekend off, and it's because it was her birthday and her parents bought her a brand new red MGB car. She crashed and died just a few hours before. So this shows two things. One is that the consciousness was at an awareness that's not bound by our physical limitations. And two is that the other consciousness who had recently passed was also there, sharing the same space. And she took the opportunity to give a message to him for her parents. And so there's a shared realm of existence. Now, depending on your religious background or cultural background, in the Sino-Mahayana Buddhist belief is that the Bardo period is 49 days. But the first 7 days is when the consciousness is most active and has the most supernatural activities. Those 7 days are often when they visit their family members, friends, and also, they want to communicate or, say goodbye. And this instance or example that he provided is very consistent with the Buddhist understanding. And the doctor continues and says that death is a change of state. He also mentions that those who experience NDE feels very interconnected with other beings. And if you read any of the Thay's or Thich Nhat Hanh's books, you're going to read a lot of texts about interbeing. In the video, the doctor provides an example where there's a young man in his mid-30s, and he had his chest crushed by his truck while he was working on it. He experienced NDE. He had one of those experiences where his life from birth to wherever he's at today flashes across. He's reliving his life very quickly. And during his teenage years, young, high testosterone, and not particularly mature, he was driving a car. A drunkard jumped in front of his vehicle. He slams on the brakes, and the drunkard comes up and actually slaps him. Got out of the car, beat the crap out of this drunkard. He relived his rage experience of beating up the drunkard, where he punched the drunkard 32 times. But as he was punching the drunkard, he was simultaneously experiencing the punches from the viewpoint of the drunkard. In fact, he was experiencing everything the drunkard was experiencing. The shame, the sadness, the hurt, the pain. He was living as two individuals at the same time. One from his own self standpoint and one as the receiver. And the doctor says that this type of experience seems pervasive about being interconnected. So he gives an example where he says, it's like the hand. It's got 5 fingers, and each finger thinks they're individual, but they're really all interconnected. This is very Buddhist. In fact, I invited a Zen master, Master Greyson. He was the abbot of Dharma Drum Retreat Center upstate in New York, a very high practitioner. And he would often teach classes where he would have puppets. And he would say, well, each puppet thinks they're an individual, but they're all interconnected. Now, the doctor mentions that those who experience NDE, they feel that the NDE that they experienced is more real than when they come back to being alive in our reality. Now, it may sound illogical, but from a Buddhist practitioner standpoint, this makes so much sense, because Buddhism says that this world is illusory. Not that this world is not real, but that this physical world is a conditioned existence and it's ephemeral. Another example that Dr. Bruce Greyson mentioned is that those who experience NDE felt that time doesn't exist. And that's another big concept in Buddhism. At least that's how I understand. So in Buddhist sutras, they will often mention lines like timeless beginnings. And from someone like me who has limited knowledge, and I will reference the sutra, the Lotus Sutra. Time plays a big part in that sutra. So those are some of the points that I thought were very Buddhist, though I think that other religious traditions may find these points also similar to their beliefs. Now, there are a few other points that I found were fascinating and could be also explained in Buddhist cosmology. For example, the experiences are indescribable, like trying to describe an odor with crayons. And that just goes to show the limitations of our worldly senses. And in the Buddhist sutras, of course, they mention about other worlds where you don't have these senses. Now, the doctor also argues that NDE are not subjective realities, like when one is hungry, but it's more objective because people all over the world are describing the similar experiences. Often, NDE contradicts the subject's religious beliefs, so their experiences were not expected. And in fact, youngsters from ages 2 to 4 who weren't indoctrinated describe similar experiences. Many or most after experiencing NDE are no longer afraid of dying, and many feel that there's a purpose in life. They have a decreased desire for worldly things and enhanced spirituality. They're also more compassionate and more altruistic. What he described in terms of NDE is fascinating, where the mind continues after death. It's a change of state, and it goes to another plane of existence. And based on my understanding, a commonality amongst the many different Buddhist lineages is that when someone is near their end or just ended, the Buddhist Sangha would go and pray next to that person providing instructions and directions so that individual can go to the next place or go in the right direction. As for me, part of my Buddhist study and practice is also to prepare for the ultimate. And I found his talk to be very informative and supportive of my Buddhist practice. Now, as I mentioned, this talk that I listened to is Dr. Greyson's book, After. I'm not saying you should buy or not buy. However, I will say that I purchased the book and I do plan to read it. Thank you very much for watching. I put a link to his video in the description.